Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I'm your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 142, recording on Tuesday afternoon, January 20th. I hope all of you are well. As we always do early on the Alec Lewis Show in the first episode of the week, kind of going to do a round robin of topics. We'll hit the Vikings staff. We will hit some quarterback thoughts that I have after some conversations over the course of this week and the last couple weeks. And then we will also talk Jordan Addison at the top. So we'll go deep on all three of those subjects: Addison, Vikings staff, and quarterback over the course of this episode. And then if you guys have any questions, please toss them in the comment section, throw them at me on social media, and we will get to more later in the week. As promised last week, we'll have some guests here coming up. Looking forward to those. Some will be big picture conversations. Some will be specific to topics that hopefully you guys enjoy. I will also add, if there is any guest who you want to listen to, throw that at me as well. I'd love to have them, love to have the conversations, and we have time now to do it. So looking forward to that. This show, first of all, is on YouTube. It's on Spotify. It's on Apple. It's on iHeart, wherever you want to consume content, because that's what we do in the year 2026. You can find a place to do that with the Alec Lewis Show. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. If you're listening, you can follow us and rate and give us 5 stars, whatever. It helps us out. The show is presented by First Resource Bank. If you don't know about it, it's a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area. Got branches all over the place, and it's run by really good people who are Vikings fans. Easy to set up an account. The online banking platform is really, really good. The information for First Resource, is in the description below. The link is right there, and you can check that out. All right, we'll start with Jordan Addison because that is the news of the day. If you have been at work, or if you've been working out, or if you've been outside, which I can't imagine you would be, given that the weather could not be colder, even if it could, and hopefully it won't be. Jordan Addison, the Vikings receiver who's entering his 4th season, in fact, had his trespassing charge in Tampa dismissed today. That was kind of uncovered in the court records in Hillsborough County, which is down in Tampa, where that event occurred. Susan Lopez, who's the state attorney down there, issued the notice of termination of the prosecution. And then Jordan Addison's attorney in the case, Brian Packett, issued a statement. Within it was a quote: this poor young man's name was being dragged through the mud over frivolous allegations and absolutely zero smoke or fire. So Jordan Addison, who's now had 3 brushes with the law since he became a Minnesota Vikings receiver in 2023 when he was a first-round pick, this charge for trespassing after being, according to the arrest record, told to leave the Hard Rock Casino, Seminole Hard Rock Casino down there, this will be thrown out. As for discipline, that would probably make it pretty difficult in regards to that subject. But I wanted to talk about Jordan Addison because, this is the offseason where the Vikings are going to have to decide on his 5th-year option. The date on that is May 1st, so the Vikings obviously have 3 more months to be able to make that decision. The 5th-year option, I guess for the uninitiated, a rookie contract typically is 4 years for first-round picks. Teams have the button to pull, button to press, the lever to pull on the potential 5th-year option that is fixated at a certain cost. The projection right now for the 5th year for Jordan Addison at receiver is around $17.5 million. That's like around the 15th highest paid receiver, 15th to 20th highest paid receiver. So it's a good amount of money, but I would say with the talent that Jordan Addison has shown he can be, it's not a number that is not palatable for the Vikings organization. It's just going to be a matter of confidence and conviction in where Jordan Addison is obviously at that point. I mean, I will say, like, this is a pivotal time for him. Off the field, obviously, over the next 4 months or what have you. But on the field too, when he returns, whether it's OTAs, whether it's training camp, whether it's mini camp. I mean, Jordan Addison, by all accounts, both my own observation being out at TCO Performance Center every day for training camp, I mean, he was probably the best offensive player in Vikings training camp. Obviously, Justin Jefferson was sidelined with the hamstring injury, but Jordan Addison was all over the field. He caught everything. He was really reliable. He was engaged. And then obviously he had to depart because he was suspended for the first 3 games. And from that point to now, it's really been a downward trajectory. I mean, he, again, suspended for the first 3 games due to the second off-field situation where he was found asleep on the side of the road in Los Angeles near the LAX airport in a Rolls Royce. That situation sparked the 3-game suspension, and then he returned for the Pittsburgh game in Dublin, then was held out the first quarter of the Week 5 matchup against the Browns in London. And again, from that point forward, there was a lot of inconsistency with this play. Is he still the incredibly fluid route runner that he has been? Absolutely. Is he still a guy who knows all the positions in a very complex system where it's very advantageous for the receivers to be able to move around, line up in the backfield, line up in the slot, line up out wide? Yes, like he is still that guy. But you know, this period is critical for him to reestablish the confidence and the trust that the Vikings have really reiterated having in him over the course of his time here. I mean, he had 6 drops this past season, which was more than he had in the 2 seasons combined total. I mean, I'm thinking about the one in Seattle. I'm thinking about one at home, either to against the Ravens or the Bears in an attempt over the middle thrown by J.J. McCarthy. I mean, the lack of reliability definitely is important for Jordan Addison's career moving forward. And I get the questions all the time, and I see the comments all the time of, well, like I've seen it today, where this trespassing charge is dismissed. Okay, that makes it easier to trade him. What I would say on that subject is that the Vikings in this regime, I don't expect them to ever trade people at their lowest value. That just doesn't, it's just not sensible with how this regime currently thinks about it. And so that's what I'd say on that subject. And Jordan Addison was drafted to be a clear fixture as part of the Vikings offensive identity, which has been to throw the ball downfield vertically and be able to use the pass catching talent to a premium advantage. So kind of the summary of the Jordan Addison conversation, the news is the news, but there is no overstating the importance of what these next handful of months are going to be for Jordan Addison's future here, and obviously his value throughout the NFL. So it's one of those subjects that if you were to tier it, or if I'm making a ranking, or if there's a hierarchy and it's like, what are the most important subjects with this Vikings team? It's probably not in the top 5, but it's one of those sneaky ones lurking that, in my opinion, are really critical as this thing pushes forward, speaking about the organization. So hopefully that answers some questions on that subject. Again, 5th-year option. The deadline is May 1st. And the projected cost around $17.5 million. So that's kind of the Jordan Addison topic. And it's also one where Jalen Naylor is through with his rookie contract. He is projected to be a free agent. He had a really, really good year on and off the field, established a lot of trust over the course of his time here with coaches, with the front office, etc. But he's going to get paid. You have conversations with people across the league, or when I do, his name comes up. There is interest externally for him. There's an understanding, I think, from people in other buildings of the type of value that he can bring and the amount that he can be a guy who is trusted. And that's what a lot of these offensive coordinators, play callers, play designers are looking for. Like when we're out there and I need 11 to execute, how much can I guarantee that guy is going to be at the certain route depth, making the catch, and reliable off the field in between weeks. So just adds a layer of intrigue to kind of this subject as a whole. You guys might be curious about Ty Felton. There's a lot of positives behind the scenes internally with Ty Felton. Has been a really good, like, behind the scenes, has done everything that he's had to do, that he's been asked to do, played a key role on special teams. The athleticism and the speed, all of that stands out and has stood out and behind the scenes on the practice field. It's just going to be a matter of producing consistently, making catches consistently when he's thrust into it, if that does become the case for the 2026 season. So we'll segue from the Addison discussion to the Vikings staff situation. I wrote a little bit about this at The Athletic, where I do my day job covering this team for Tuesday morning, and hit a bunch of subjects, but we'll push some forward here and go a little bit deeper here on some of them. We'll start with Brian Flores, the Vikings defensive coordinator. It is my understanding that he was supposed to have an in-person interview with the Pittsburgh Steelers for their head coaching job on Tuesday. You talk to people in the league, it's a very competitive job. They haven't hired a ton of head coaches in their history, and I don't think they want to be in the market of cycling and recycling the way that some of these teams have tended to be. That's one aspect of the Vikings organization. For better or worse, they tend to be patient and want sustainability and consistency. And I do think that's probably the best long-term approach, unless you know definitively that someone is not the answer in one of those leadership roles. But back to Brian Flores and the Steelers, again, it's supposed to be a pretty competitive job. Really think the question in the, when you have conversations with people related to this subject is, are the Steelers in a rush to make this happen? Are they going to be willing to wait for the Rams, per se, to bow out of the playoffs, whether they take it all the way, win the Super Bowl, whether they lose this weekend to the Seahawks? Are the Steelers going to want to wait to talk to the Rams, some of the Rams staff who is up for some of these positions? And the two most prominent names are Chris Shula, their defensive coordinator, who has done really good work there, was a pass rush guy, became the DC in 2024, has done a really good job again this year in 2025 as their DC. You can watch, he's done clinics before that are available, pretty dynamic personality, seems pretty aware, and it is well respected in the industry. So, he would be a guy where if the Steelers are willing to wait, would he be a candidate for that job? I think that's one that people wonder about. And then the other name from Los Angeles in particular is Nate Scheelhaase, who is on the offensive side there, or has worked with the pass game, designed the passing game a little bit for the Rams, and he'd be another one from the Rams where if the Steelers want to wait this thing out, like those two guys I'd be curious about. And so that's why, with the Brian Flores subject, do I expect there to be this real short-term finality? I would say never on that. But in the event that these things get drawn out, the Vikings obviously would allow that to play out with Brian Flores. Back to Chris Shula really quick. The Steelers' meta and who they've hired have been kind of the defensive-minded CEO type guys. That's where Chris Shula fits. I also think Brian Flores, he's obviously one of the most elite defensive minds in the NFL. You talk to anybody, that's pretty clear. You watch the games like I do, that's pretty clear as well. And it's a defensive vision, it's a scouting ability, it's an adaptability, it's innovation. All of that stuff is partly the reason why the Vikings defense over the last two seasons has been a top 3 defense according to DVOA. So there's also, you guys know this, the familiarity with Mike Tomlin, the familiarity that Brian Flores has with ownership, given his time there in 2022. All that stuff will probably factor in. And then one of the underrated aspects of these coaching hires that I don't know if it gets talked enough about, but there is a critical component of these hires that encompasses who, with these candidates, who are they then going to hire for their staff? And I think it's both really integral to who gets these jobs. I also think sometimes it's overlooked a little bit. Like, yes, you hired this guy as your head coach, but what type of connections does that person have to be able to build a really elite staff at the coordinator level, at the position coach level? I mean, you guys know, just monitoring the Vikings here locally, the importance of the coordinator hires, massive. The importance of position coaches who have a lot of respect, both across the league, but also from players. Like, that stuff is really important. So that's the thing with some of these younger coaches. Sometimes they tend to, more probably hire who they know, whereas older coaches probably have more of a, whatever you want, an ability, a Rolodex to gauge certain availability of other coaches to fill out their staff. And I think that's a really important component of some of these coaching hires that sometimes doesn't get talked enough about. If Brian Flores doesn't get the head coaching job in Pittsburgh, I mean, it's going to be a tough situation for him from a head coaching perspective. I mean, it feels like Jesse Minter, the DC in Los Angeles with the Chargers, has a pretty good shot in Las Vegas. He's also interviewed with the Ravens and would expect him to be a candidate there. And then other than that, I mean, Arizona, it doesn't seem like, from everything I understand, I don't believe Brian Flores is interviewed with Arizona. And then you're talking about some of these defensive coordinator possibilities, what would be available. Would a head coach be willing to go that route? Would Brian Flores want to go that route? All of that stuff still kind of remains up in the air, and questions to broach once the head coaching opportunities either dry up or whether it happens. To segue a little bit to Durante Jones. So we've talked about Durante. I've written about Durante. He is the Vikings, or has been the Vikings defensive backs coach and defensive pass game coordinator. Really respected by the players. Have never heard a bad thing about him and the way he operates. He, if I'm not mistaken, a couple years ago was the defensive coordinator down at the Senior Bowl for one of those teams, and that's typically a really good step for young coaches to command the room, to teach players, to build relationships with other coaches. Durante's interviewed a ton in the past, really the past year for some of these defensive coordinator roles. Like last year, it was New Orleans. It was, if I'm not mistaken, the New York Giants a couple years ago he interviewed for their defensive coordinator position. This year already, he's had a couple interviews with the Dallas Cowboys. He's interviewed with the New York Jets and maintained contact with Aaron Glenn, their head coach. He's supposed to be interviewing with the New York Giants. Believe the Miami Dolphins called him as well. So Durante Jones, the Vikings defensive pass game coordinator, defensive back coach, is a really coveted name on the defensive side in this cycle. And what I would also say is whether it's defensive coordinators from this point forward, like a Chris Shula, who potentially could get hired as head coaches, that would create more defensive coordinator openings. And then even those guys who do get hired, they're going to need defensive coordinators themselves. And given the amount of interest, intrigue in Durante Jones over the course of this cycle thus far, I wouldn't expect it to stop, and feel like he's probably going to have a really good chance to get a defensive coordinator position. I've written this, but I had a conversation with an executive last year who was in an interview with Durante, said to me, he blew it away, did a really good job. They ended up going with someone else, but it was like, this is probably going to happen for him pretty soon. So Not going to be crazy surprised, and the Vikings aren't going to be crazy surprised if he gets a defensive coordinator position. That would obviously add more uncertainty to the Viking staff and things moving forward, given that there's already some holes to fill. I mean, you obviously have the assistant head coach role if the Vikings want to fill that for Mike Pettine's departure and retirement. You have Michael Hutchings, the safeties coach. It was reported that he was taking the Cal defensive coordinator job, so the safeties coaching role, that would be one of them. Chris Cooper, obviously not being retained as offensive line coach, that's one of them. And then, I mean, there's other coaches who's it's a little bit uncertain. I mean, I'd say another name that I'd throw out there, the Vikings defensive line coach, Marcus Dixon, I think has done a hell of a job in the past couple of seasons, and working with Jalen Redmond, working with Levi Drake Rodriguez, bunch of guys. What does his future look like? Are other teams going to be interested in him? He's done a good job with the front. It's been a pretty adaptable front. They do some different things. Are other coaches in other buildings aware of that? Are they going to be intrigued by him? Like, I would say so. And so what is the future hold for a guy like him? And then there's even Mike Saravo, a name I've talked about as well in this podcast, linebackers coach, has done a really good job with Blake Cashman, with Eric Wilson, and knows the Brian Flores system well. He was in college at Baylor. He worked with, believe, Phil Snow in Carolina, so has a lot of different ideologies, philosophies. Like in other defensive coordinator spots, why would he not be a name that's coveted? So this is a time where, and I've said this on the podcast, you guys are probably tired of hearing it from me or reading about it, but there's a lot of flux within the industry of who goes where, what is their staff going to look like. I mean, a great example is in Green Bay. You've got the Miami Dolphins hire one of their assistant GMs, John Eric Sullivan. They hire Jeff Hafley, the defensive coordinator. And so the Packers need a defensive coordinator. What happens if Jeff Hafley takes one of the coaches on that staff to be his offensive coordinator? Then they're going to need to replace that role. So there's a lot of moving, and then whoever gets that role, do they want to bring other people involved? That's a lot of what it's. I mean, it's probably a way tiresome cliche, but it's very much a musical chairs type of situation right now, and always around this time. But when you have 10 head coaching spots and you've got other coordinator opportunities open, like that's another dynamic of this. Tampa Bay's hiring an offensive coordinator down there. What does that mean for other staff there? The Lions, they hired Drew Petzing. What does that mean for other staff? What does that mean for the staff who'd been in Arizona? Like there's a lot of moving and shaking that makes you monitor. So that's what I'd say. Just to finish on the Viking staff subject, as far as the offensive line coach, I mentioned Chris Cooper. We did an emergency podcast on that because we are sickos here. And I am of the belief that the offensive line coaching position is a massively important one for organizations, not just for coaches or teams, but for organizations. When you think about what development and production at that spot does for your entire team. So that's why we did the emergency podcast. That's why I'm going to talk about it for a second now. It's my understanding the Vikings have definitely made lists. They're planning to be aggressive with it. And I mean, there's a lot of relationships there that should make things possible. Bill Callahan, one of the revered coaches in the space, was hired to work with a guy who he'd worked with in the past, and Kevin Stefanski down in Atlanta. So that obviously opened or pushed Dwayne Ledford, who had been Atlanta's offensive line coach, into the free agent market. And I expect him to be really coveted. He's a guy who obviously the Vikings are aware of. They've played Atlanta in previous years. Atlanta ran the ball well on the Vikings in week 2 this past season. So I would also say that Dwayne Ledford has a really close relationship with Arthur Smith, who is in the conversation for certain offensive coordinator roles, and so you can understand why it's hard to pin one guy on one specific role at this kind of time around at this time of the year. But I expect the Vikings to be aggressive with it. I think they really have a feel and an understanding of how important a role it is going to be to fill, and so I expect the urgency to kind of match the importance that it seems to be for those internally. So that's what I'll say on the Vikings staff. Quick segue before we go quarterback, and then hop out of here on this Tuesday afternoon. The show is also sponsored by UNRL. I wear it every podcast. It is a locally owned and operating clothing brand based out of St. Paul that is elite. I mean, I'm wearing it all the time. It's really good for weather like this when you're just lounging around the house because you can't go outside. You don't want to go outside. All you want to, for me, it was, I mean, I've been watching playoff games. I've been hanging out, been working out. What else is there to possibly do when it is -2 and it feels like you're being stung when you walk outside? So I wear UNRL even when I'm outside. But they've supported the show all year, all season, and have been a great partner with us, and can't thank them enough for it. They've got a drop coming, I think, on like a limited edition Minnesota Wild gear, which I don't know how I'm going to get, but I'm going to have to beg them for that. And if they watch this and see it, they can just send it to my address immediately. But really appreciate their partnership. And UNRL. The information for them to get some clothes is in the description below. Now to the quarterback conversation, because people have asked, you guys have asked about the quarterback situation, and I don't blame you for that. Obviously, there has been nothing publicly said in the last week or so about the Vikings and what they're going to do beyond the pretty clear and forward comment that they want to bring competition and that they want to build the most talented quarterback room possible. What I would say is it's very much in the exploration phase of who's out there, who's going to be available, who's a good fit, who's accurate, who has field vision, who could operate this system, who can be brought in that people would believe in, get behind, and buy into. All of that is kind of in the exploration phase, which is probably pretty obvious given the time of year, but that's really where it is. It's an evaluation of what options exist. And I'd say, like, really, especially given that the playoffs are still ongoing, teams are doing a lot of focused really primarily on their coaching staff, and not doing full deep dives, probably decision organizational plans into the next few months for free agency and all of that. You don't really know what's going to be available via trade at the moment. And until probably that avenue is exhausted, it's hard to come up with a really, really refined list of which potential free agent candidates are the most sensible. I will say this on the subject because I think it is important. Everything is pretty interconnected. So if we're going down the road of it's March, the combine just ended, free agency's forthcoming, and the Vikings haven't made any trade or anything, and the Vikings have to target a free agent, and they're going to be selling something to the free agent. I do think having Brian Flores as your defensive coordinator and the idea that you're going to have stability on that side is going to matter in the eyes of potential free agents. Like you've seen it with Sam Darnold this season. And you saw it with Sam Darnold last season when he was here. Having an exceptional defense as a backbone just makes things easier. It's the same thing as the run game. When you know a team has a really good defense and is going to rely on a run game as a quarterback or as a representative or agent of a quarterback or a family member of a quarterback, you can have much more conviction and confidence in where you're playing quarterback. So I'd say vet quarterbacks, especially guys who are on their last runs or even guys who are trying to place themselves in position to set themselves up long-term, like Sam Darnold was in 2024, they're going to be very cognizant of the circumstances around the quarterback. And it's one thing, and it's really a valuable thing when you have a guy like Kevin O'Connell as the head coach who has done what he's done with a certain bar of quarterback in years past. But to have other dynamic components of your team as part of the foundation, I think is really important as part of the pitch. So that's why, as much as having Flores for the Vikings defense is important, it's also a sales component in that conversation and the discussion. And the same goes for the offensive line coach. I mean, who you have in that role. And I mentioned the importance of a run game in quarterbacks' eyes, but this stuff is real. Like when I have conversations with agents, or I talk to teams, or I talk to other players, like this stuff, being able to present the best package for a certain player, if that's what you're indeed having to do, specifically at the quarterback position, you have to be squared away in all of these areas to provide the best foundation and provide the best opportunity. So that's what I'd say. And then just to end it with the quarterback, it's hard for me to imagine the Vikings with whoever they go after, whether via trade or in free agency a couple months from now. And really, I mean, it's crazy. The combine is a month from now. So there's not much. We'll be speculating probably, but once we hit February 22nd, I'll be in Indianapolis, and there will be a lot of conversations and hopefully a lot of unearthing that happens there. But to get back to the kind of the final point, like it's hard for me to imagine that the Vikings would dip lower in whoever they target via trade or free agency than a Mac Jones type level is what I would say. And I mean, it just really is. And you can argue probably like, okay, well, what is that? Who's around that? Like, is Davis Mills the Mac Jones level? Is Malik Willis the Mac Jones level? Is Tanner McKee the Mac Jones level? You could probably argue that. But what I guess the point is, whether you're talking about like 20th in the NFL level quarterback play, if you can generating that from whoever is the target at the bare minimum, for me would be the expectation. And as I've said many times, I'm not going to put a cap or a ceiling on what that level could be, because I don't think the Vikings are either. And those are conversations that have to be had. But you do need a level of floor and of sustainability that Daniel Jones obviously would have given you last year. And that Carson Wentz kind of got close to, but also came with the injury risk that the Vikings are going to have to be mindful of as well within these targets. So that's kind of the way I would talk about the quarterback situation with where we're at. So that'll do it probably on Addison, the staff, the quarterback situation. Like I said at the top, any questions you've got, toss them in the comment section or throw them at me on social media, on X at @Alec_Lewis, at Alec Lewis Show. You can follow us on there. You can follow us on Instagram at Alec Lewis Show. So we'll have a lot more to come. Like I said, any guest suggestions, guest thoughts, I'm all ears for that. Got some stuff lined up, but we'll add more over the next few days, weeks, and months. Appreciate you being here. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, follow us, go read some of our day-to-day work over at The Athletic. We'll have a story on impending free agents for Thursday that you guys will probably read, and some bigger picture stuff we're working on in the back burner. So can't wait to get to some of that. Check out Unreal, check out First Resource Bank, and we will stay warm, please, more than anything else, and we will talk to you very, very soon.